Despite there only being 80 new cards in this mini set that is Mythical Island, there is a handful of cards that will make very niche decks very strong, but also existing decks even stronger also. In today's Pokemon TCG Pocket video, we'll be breaking down the top 10 strongest cards in the set, why they're strong, and how it's going to affect the meta. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the video. Serperior sits at 10th place purely for its ability Jungle Totem. Grass decks' biggest shortcomings are building enough energy, especially with Venusaur EX decks. 4 turns of applying energy and only dealing 100 damage is pretty lackluster. That all changes with Serperior, as Jungle Totem adds an additional grass energy to each of your grass Pokemon, providing they already have 1 grass energy attached already. The effect does not stack, but essentially what it means is that the first energy you attach is counted as 2, which then means moves like Psychic on the new Executor becomes very strong by turn 3. However, the one Pokemon that makes the most out of this ability is Celebi, which brings us nicely to our next Pokemon. Celebi sits right after Serperior at 9th place. At 130 HP, it comes with the attack Powerful Bloom for 1 grass energy and 1 colorless. It does 50 damage for each heads, and you flip as many coins as energy attached to this Pokemon. You only really need around 4 energy on this Pokemon, which can be done within 3 moves if you have Serperior ready to go on your bench. I don't think many coin flip attacks deserve to be in the top 10, but with this Pokemon having unlimited attack potential that can be stacked on the bench whilst other grass Pokemon heal and stall, it certainly makes an exception compared to other attacks. There are clear weaknesses to Celebi however, with a low health pool for an EX card, the RNG nature of its attack, and still being weak to early one-hit KOs from Mewtwo EX and Charizard EX, it sits lower on the top 10. But still a card that will be very frustrating to play against and perhaps play with depending on your coin flips. Mew EX is an unusual one and is in 8th place. Everyone went crazy over its attack Geome hacking and its potential. But once you started thinking about the energy cost and how your opponent will and can work around it, you realise that Mew has counterplay, and cards like Mewtwo EX have a more secure way of dealing damage with side drive that the opponent can't really do much about. However, that doesn't mean Mewtwo EX isn't good. In fact, one other new card introduced in the set, Budding Expeditioner, adds an angle that its Mewtwo EX counterpart doesn't have. That being the ability to retreat Mew back to the hand and return it to the bench with full health. There are drawbacks however, the energy will be lost, which is a very expensive move, and thus will require the use of Gardevoir. I think this card would have been much higher on the list if it had a 0 retreat cost like its TCG Live counterpart. But Mew will be used in some way, shape or form. It does have high potential and will get some good use out of higher level players. But the need for other cards to make it viable means that it's lower down on the list. Okay, let's talk about Tauros, which stands at a firm 7. Tauros is the supposed EX killer, where it will deal 120 damage for free energy if the opponent's active Pokemon is an EX. It's the best amount of damage you can get from a basic non-EX Pokemon, and if it was any higher, it would be way too strong and launch to the first place of this list. Pikachu EX is the only one Tauros can one-shot, and to be honest, that makes sense. No standard card should be built to take out EX Pokemon with a single attack, even if they're geared towards countering them. I think this is the strongest they could have made Tauros without it being insane, and I believe they did that for a reason. The purpose being to keep EX cards in check and to not have them be the entire reason to win games, as the TCG Live metas have shown us in the past. So whilst Tauros isn't a complete meta changer, it does deserve 7th place on this list. Eevee steps in at 6. Usually a card like this wouldn't even see the top 10 spot, but since this card offers a low risk, extremely high reward, and how it can fit within Blaine aggro decks with Flareon and now the powerful Blastoise EX decks with Vaporeon, it deserves to be in the top 10 despite its RNG nature. Continuous steps for 1 colorless energy deals 20 damage for each heads you flip until you land tails. The only other Pokemon who has an attack like this is Lickitung with Continuous Lick. Lickitung was used in niche decks as a flip and pray approach to dealing enormous damage. But with its high energy retreat, free energy requirement, no other Pokemon or trainer cards to offer it additional energy, and only having 90 HP with no evolution path, It was simply too much of a commitment for the risk. Eevee circumvents most of these issues in return for 40 damage less per coin flip, and that's fine. Unlike Lickitung, we're not trying to knock out a Pokemon EX with Eevee here. With just 3 heads on the player's first turn, it could completely derail most opponents' plans by knocking out a vital basic Pokemon. Besides, take a look at the alternative Eevee cards. All they're doing are standard 20 damage. They're objectively worse cards. With no cap to its potential damage, this will be a very fun card to use in many niche decks, and most decks that require Flareon, Jolteon and Vaporeon. And as new sets introduce the likes of Espeon, Umbreon, Leafeon, Glaceon and the such, this card won't be going away anytime soon. Mythical Slab might look useless at first glance. I mean, you take one look at the top card of your deck, and if it happens to be a Psychic Pokemon, you get to put it in your hand, and if not, it goes to the bottom of your deck. But it's actually quite the opposite. Mythical Slab makes any Psychic deck an 18 card deck, and with each deck revolving around 6 to 8 core cards, having items like this to thin the deck out as much as possible is important. Potion is a good card, X-Speed is a good card, Giovanni is a good supporter, but they all have niche uses that will be useless to draw at certain parts of the game. With Mythical Slab, it has a chance to thin the deck out by 2 more cards within 1 turn. And when used after Pokeball, you have a chance to pull Ralts' evolution line faster. Some might prefer to run red card instead to punish opponents drawing too many cards, but if you want to land that Mewtwo EX endgame faster, Mythical Slab will guarantee that, whether you draw a Psychic Pokemon or not, which is why this card is a must for all Psychic decks and will get 5th place. Volcarona comes up next at 4th place. With 120 HP, it comes with 1 single attack. For 2 fire and 1 colourless energy, Volcanic Ash requires the Pokemon to discard 2 fire energy in return for attacking one of your opponent's Pokemon. This might sound like a lot to sacrifice for just 1 attack, but Charizard EX decks commonly overproduce too much energy thanks to Moltres' Inferno Dance. And honestly, you'll only want to use Volcanic Ash once, because 80 damage to a benched Pokemon is extremely powerful. It's enough to knock out even some stage 1 Pokemon like Nidorina, Wartortle, Gloom and Venomoth, just to name a few. If in the case that Charizard EX is knocked out when using said deck, there is an extremely high chance that it will have taken out one of your opponent's EX cards. Basically survive enough to score 2 points thanks to its massive 180 HP health pool. This is where Volcarona can jump in and sweep one of the opponent's benched Pokemon to land that final point. And since it's only a stage 1 Pokemon, it's easy to build up and prepare before its time comes. Golem is by far the most reliable card we have ever seen for fighting decks, and it's why it stands comfortably at number 3. Its 160 HP health pool and 120 damage attack, it's a surprise it's not a Pokemon EX card. Whilst the 4 energy attack and stage 2 evolution does mean it will take a while to get this Pokemon ready for action, it's effectively a better version of Melmetal in every way. Guard Press deals a massive 120 damage and then also reduces any attacks towards Golem by 30 HP. Still not enough to survive Charizard's iconic Crimson Storm, but enough to survive 90% of attacks thrown by EX cards. And let me remind you again, this isn't an EX card, but what makes Golem so much higher on this list is the usage of Brock as a support card. That additional 2 fighting energy could have this giant ready for action by early mid-game rather than the usual late game, which is yet another reason why this supersedes Melmetal. With most fighting decks being revolved around Marowak EX and Primeape, which require circumstances outside of the player's control, Golem will see enormous amounts of play within the meta. Vaporeon lands 2nd place purely thanks to its ability Washout. As often as you like during your turn, you may move as many water energies from your benched water Pokemon to your active Pokemon. Mix this with Misty, which should be mandatory in all water decks, it makes all of those decks extremely agile. Retreating Pokemon is an extremely useful tool to avoid giving your opponent a point, so much so that X-Speed cards are mandatory in all decks right now. The existence of Vaporeon will make Blastoise EX decks the meta going forward, as Hydro Bazooka will now become a threatening tool that will be difficult to work around and will surely weaken the power that Mewtwo EX decks have on the game. I'd go as far to say that some players may run an additional Baby Blastoise, as Hydro Pump is the same attack with 20 damage less than its EX variant. And first place goes, without question, to Pokemon Flute. We discussed in an earlier episode that the TCG Live Supporter card, Boss's Orders, will never see the light of day in Pocket. It is simply a far more powerful version of Sabrina, a card that is already used in every single deck within Pocket. With the introduction of Pokemon Flute, we slowly closed the gap of a move like Boss's Orders being possible. This item card will force players to be so careful with what basic Pokemon they will be utilizing in their decks going forward, and will punish players who run low amounts of Pokemon in their decks. Don't have enough damage to wipe out the opponent's second Charizard EX despite having 2 points already? Pokemon Flute, a 60 HP basic Charmander they already used, hit them with Sabrina and knock out that Pokemon. We've been given even more bench attacking Pokemon like Electabuzz and Lumion in this set, and plenty more in Genetic Apex. And all those cards have gotten stronger with the introduction of Pokemon Flute. Last but not least, this will indirectly buff Victory Bell, as its ability, Fragrance Trap, syncs perfectly with this item card, as it can force the opponent to put out a newly revived basic Pokemon into the active spot without Sabrina. And with its 60 damage attack Vine Whip, it will knock out most basic Pokemon. Of course, this card is not perfect. Pokemon EX cards do count as basic cards sometimes. But many times this can be circumvented because you have a choice of choosing which card to pull from the discard pile. But at the end of the day, this card alone can really mess up a player's ability to plan ahead with their attacks and bring uncertainty to the next couple of moves that you can take advantage of. Newer players might not find this card useful. In fact, they might even think it will make them worse off, and they're right in thinking that. If this card is not properly used, you will certainly be helping your opponent, but used smartly, it can be devastating, and I expect it will be used in higher levels of play. So that is the list. We did a lot of research and playtesting to come to these conclusions, and of course, this is a first impressions top 10 list. As players get used to these cards in the next coming weeks, we will see changes, and potentially unexpected cards being stronger than we all first thought. There were some other cards we wanted to place in a honourable mention, but to prevent this video from being too long, perhaps we can have them in a different video. But for now, do you agree with this list? Let me know in the comments down below, and perhaps there are some other cards that we didn't mention that deserve the top 10. But that is everything for now. For more Pokemon videos, you can check out this one that should be appearing on the end screen now.